Well, a very good evening to you all, and I have to say thank you for joining me today on what is actually quite a sunny day, so I'm glad you chose me over that. Anyway, welcome to TechnoClub, and today I thought we would have a go at doing a little bit of, well, orbital mechanics. Basically, how things work in space with gravity, planets, orbits, all that malarkey. But before I get on to actually showing you the code, I wanted to show you a quick game that was made that's all about orbital mechanics. And this game was made in the year 1962. It's called Spacewall. I will post a link for anyone who wants to give it a go. And yeah, it's, let's just say, old. It's not actually running on a computer screen, it's running on an oscilloscope. But it's hard to see. There's a black hole in the middle, and there are two rockets orbiting the black hole. And you pilot one of them, and you can shoot and you can thrust. And basically, it's just very hard to steer, very hard to do anything, and it's quite slow. And oh, I've disappeared now. Oh, and I exploded. Anyway, we're going to make something that's a little bit similar to this. And by similar, I mean we're going to use some of the mechanics used in the black hole. So if anyone asks you what you did today, you can say, I made a game based around code from a video game made in 1962. Anyway, we're going to be using arcade.makecode.com. If you've been on stream before, you will know that this is my favourite, and I always keep coming back to it. And if you go onto that website and just click New Project, I'll call this Gravity Sim. You could call it whatever you like. And let's create it. And, well, the first thing I'm going to do is going to close the simulator. So my laptop has a little bit room to breathe. And we're going to need three things to start off with our game. We're going to need a player rocket. We are going to need a black hole. And we're going to need an enemy. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to sprites. And I'm going to grab the create a sprite block, the set my sprite to sprite of kind player. And I'm going to plonk it in there. And of course, I could leave it as my sprite, but that's not going to be very useful when we've got lots of sprites later on. So I'm going to click the drop down arrow and I'm going to rename the variable. This is going to be my player rocket. And okay. And I can design it, can't I? If I click on there, a little bit. I do like a bit of. Am I feeling lazy today? Yeah, I'm feeling lazy today. I'm not going to bother designing a rocket. I'm just going to load in from the gallery up here something that's already been made. Anything that takes my fancy. I could use a pencil. That's close enough to a rocket. I'm going to use a duck. That's also close enough to a rocket. Yeah, so my rocket character is, my player is a duck. Never mind. It's just, we can use it as a placeholder. So I've got the player. I also need the black hole. So that's going to go next. I'm going to go to sprites. I'm going to set my sprite to sprite of kind. And I need to rename this one as well, because my sprite is so generic I don't know what my sprite is. They're all my sprites, technically, if I've made them all. This is going to be the black hole. And I don't want it to be a sprite of kind player. I want it to be something else. So I'm going to, before I choose what it looks like, I'm going to go over to the end here and press that drop down arrow, and I've got a choice between player, projectile, food, or enemy. It's not really any of those. Let's add a new kind. I'm going to call this decoration, because that's all it is, just a bit of decoration. And yeah, let's give it some pixels. Again, I'm loading from the gallery just because I'm lazy. It's Thursday. It's, you know, close enough to Friday. Let's go. That one looks a bit planet-like. That one's alright. Yeah, let's go for that one. Looks a bit like a Martian planet. So we got our rocket. We've got our black hole, which is the source of the gravity. Now we need an enemy. So again, we head over to sprites. And I'm going to set my sprite to sprite of kind. And this is going to be enemy. And I'm not going to call it my sprite. I'm going to rename it. And this will be enemy rocket. Okay. And let's pick something that's going to be the enemy. Let's go for a car. Because cars are the natural enemies of ducks, of course. Of course, you've got more time than I do. You can customize these to your liking. You can put in whatever character, creature, thing you want. Draw your own, or use a pre-made one. It's up to you. Make it yours. So if I open the simulator now, we can see so far. This is why I don't open the simulator. There we are. We've got all our sprites all sitting on top of each other. So I'm just going to tell the player and the enemy to get out of the way. So we've got a little bit more to work with. So if I go to sprites, I can set the position of either of them with the set position block. And let's set the position of the player rocket to 0, 0. That's going to be in the top left hand corner. Let's make that a little bit more sensible. Let's move him right a little bit. So 16. Will 16 do it? Probably. And let's move him down. Yeah, no, by also by 16. Yeah, it's more sensible location. And now I'm going to right click and duplicate for that, because I want the enemy rocket to be somewhere else. Let's move into the bottom right hand corner. Let's say 120. Actually, we're going to start by making the enemy orbit first. So I'm going to put the enemy next to the black hole. So that's around about 120x, and then the y, I think the middle of the screen is 60, so I want that also to be 60. Yeah, so I've put him directly next to the enemy. Sorry, the enemy I've put directly next to the black hole. That's so that it's simple to start putting gravity on the enemy. So the black hole is in the middle, and the middle of the screen is 80, 60. So to move the enemy across, I've kept the Y as 60, but I've added a little bit more onto the X to make him go to the right. So 120, 60. We can close that for now. Now, we're going to be dealing a lot with physics today. So I always find it useful to add some debug information just to see what's going on. If we go to sprites and scroll down, where is it? We can find this one. It's in effects, I believe, yeah, which says set my sprite, stay in screen, and it's got this big purple lozenge for on or off. We're going to use that one. This is the property command. We'll change that to enemy rocket because that's the one we're applying the property to. And we don't want it to stay in screen. We want it to, if we click the drop down arrow, show physics. And if we click on, it means that it'll just give us a nice little readout of what physics are acting on it at the moment. And that makes it much easier to visualize what's happening under the bonnet of the game. So, anything else to add? Yeah, let's make it so the player can actually control their rocket. We're not going to add any thrust mechanics onto it yet, just have it so that they can move around with the buttons. Nice and simple. If we go to controller, the top, very top function is move my sprite with buttons. We're going to change that to move the player rocket with buttons. And that will give us the very basics of our game with no gravity yet. And if I load up the simulator, I can move the player around and we can see it's given us the debug information for the enemy rocket. And the black hole does absolutely nothing at the moment. Let's do that next. So, to get the black hole to work, what do I want to happen? Well, I want it so that at every second, every frame of the game, the enemy rocket is asking itself, should I be attracted to the black hole? And if I am, what direction should I go? And that's kind of all that gravity is. When you walk around your planet, your physics is basically asking, what's the biggest mass in the area? What direction do you have to move to get towards that mass? And so, for that, if I need to be checking this every single possible moment of the game, I need a on-game update. And I can find that in the Game tab. And it's the top one. And the on-game update block basically gets everything in here happens several times a second. So if the game runs at 30 frames per second, this will happen 30 times a second. If a game runs at 60 frames per second, this will happen 60 times per second. The Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 just both announced with a price. Both of those claim to be able to support some games running at 120 frames per second, which means that if this were running on either of those consoles, everything inside this block would happen 120 times per second. It happens a lot. What we're going to do is we're going to test, is my enemy rocket in a certain position? And if they are, what do I need to do to get from the rocket's position towards the black hole? So, first and foremost, we're going to need an if. So I'm going to go to logic, I'm going to grab an if, and I'm going to check the position of the rocket. So let's try checking its X position. If I go to sprites Scroll down. We can find this sort of oval-shaped one, which is my sprite X. That gets the X position of a sprite. We don't want this to be my sprite. We want this to be the enemy rocket. And we need to compare it to something. So we're going to need a comparator. If I go to logic and scroll down, we're going to grab any of these three because we'll be changing the symbol anyway. And I'm going to move enemy rocket X into the left. And I'm going to move it into the if. And at the moment I'm checking if it's equal to 0. I don't want that. I want to see, is it bigger than the X position of the black hole? Basically I'm asking, is my rocket to the right of the black hole? And if it is to the right of the black hole, we need to make it go left a bit more. So I need to get the X of the black hole. So I go to sprites again, get the oval, and we're not going to check my sprite, we're going to check black hole. And we don't want to check whether these are equal, we want to check whether the enemy rocket has a greater X value than the black hole. So we need to use that drop down arrow and change that to a greater than. If the enemy rocket's X position is greater than the black hole's X position, I need to move the rocket left. So to do that, I'm going to add a little bit of velocity onto the rocket. If we go to sprites, we can set the velocity. I don't want to do that because setting the velocity is constant. It can only ever be one thing. I want to change it slowly over time. So if I go to change my sprite X by 0, we need to change that to enemy rocket. And we don't want to change its X. We want to change its X velocity. Its speed. Its sideways speed. We want to change the enemy rocket X velocity, and we need to change it by a certain amount. Now, minus is to go left, positive is to go right. So if we want this going left, this should be, let's try -1. And yeah, let's give that a go. Let's see what we get with that. And there we are. Let's restart that. Let me pause it a second. So we start the enemy rocket to the right of the black hole. And because it is right of the black hole, it's going to move left into the center. But then it carries on. Because we haven't done the rest of the directions. We've only done left so far. So there's the code. If the enemy rocket is to the right of the black hole, start adding leftwards velocity onto it. Now, you can imagine what else we need to do for this. What happens if the rocket is to the left of the black hole and it needs to move right? So we need to do the opposite now. So I'm going to click plus on this if, and that'll bring us up an else. Now, an else could work, but it's not very... In computer science, it's kind of frowned upon. It's called a boundary case. Because this is looking for stuff that's greater than the position of the black hole in the X. Then this would be everything that's equal to or less than. We need to leave the sort of equal to alone. We need to have it so that if the enemy rocket is directly on top of the black hole, no velocity is added whatsoever. And the easiest way to do that is not use an else, but to click plus again. So we got an if, an else if, and then we have an else that we don't need, so we can click minus here. So we need an if and an else if, and that's all that we need for that. And as you can imagine, we're going to do exactly the same, but just going right now. So we need to check left. If it is left, go right. And it's simply a case of copying and pasting and changing a couple of symbols. So I'm going to right click on our checking block and duplicate. Then I'm going to take the symbol in the middle, use the drop down menu and flip it to a less than. So if the enemy's X location is less than the black hole's X location, and that's the opposite of if it's bigger than. We want if it's smaller than. We also want to change the velocity by the same amount but in a different direction. So I'm going to right click on the change velocity and duplicate that as well. And we're not going to change it by -1, we're going to change that by 1, which is the opposite of -1. Let's watch. I will leave that code up. So it was to the left, was to the right, and now it's all sliding back and forth between them. And it will just keep on sort of oscillating, sort of orbiting that planet again and again and again, forever and ever and ever. And it looks like it's just sliding back and forth, but if you imagine you were going down on top of this, this would be what the enemy rocket would look like if it's going sideways, horizontally around the black hole. Okay. Enough of that. We've got the side-to-side gravity working. Now we need the up and down gravity working. And as you can imagine, this is exactly the same. We just need to change every X to a Y. So I'm going to click on the entire if statement. And I'm going to duplicate. And I'm going to stick it on underneath. And now in this block, I'm going to change every X to a Y. So if enemy rocket, change that to a Y. Black hole, Y. Change enemy rocket velocity X. No, we want velocity Y now. And if enemy rocket X, no, that should be a Y. Black hole X, that should be a Y. And change enemy rocket X velocity, change that to a Y. So if you've done this correct, you should have made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 changes there. And if you haven't made 6 changes, double check, because if you miss even one, you're going to end up with some very interesting but some very screwy physics. You know, it's hard to tell what even will happen. Let's check back in the simulator, see what it's doing. So yeah, still moving side to side. We need to test it going up and down. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a push at the start of the game. If we go to the on start block, I'm going to give the enemy rocket just a little bit of a push, just to get it moving a little bit more interestingly, a little bit more unpredictably. If I go to sprites, I can set my sprite velocity, and I'm going to change that to enemy rocket. And he's already going side to side, so I don't need to change that at all, but I can give it a little bit of a boost up or down. So let's change that to a 0, and let's change that to, pick a number, 75. And now if we watch it, we should have a much more interesting orbit going on. There you are, orbiting the black hole quite nicely. Now, this isn't perfect physics. In fact, It's a little bit odd, but I thought it's a Thursday evening. Who wants to do a load of boring math formulas? Why not just build a game? So they're not 100% accurate physics. In fact, if that were a planet, it would be doing some very, very odd things indeed. Like reversing in an orbit and that kind of stuff, but it's just a little bit of fun. And it's close enough to sort of fake gravity. Anyway. What should I do next? Should we do the projectile? Yeah, we'll save that for later. Let's have it now that the player can actually fight back a bit. So, first things first, we should have it so the player can lose. Because if you can't lose in the game, then the game is no fun. There needs to be a sort of threat for someone to enjoy a game. It's called the risk-reward balance. So we should have it that if the player hits the enemy, the player dies. And if we go to sprites and scroll down, there's this section called overlaps, and we've got this big old block that says on sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind player. We're going to use that, but we're going to change the second player. We want that to be enemy. So if the player overlaps the enemy, what should we do? Well, we should destroy the player. Simple enough. Let's go to sprites and scroll all the way down to the middle section called effects. There's this option to destroy my sprite. And we don't want to destroy my sprite because my sprite doesn't exist. We want to destroy the player. And the player is represented inside this block as this sort of sprite module here. So I'm just going to grab that just out the top and place it in where my sprite was. So we destroy the player. Let's make it fancy. Let's click plus and we can use an effect. Let's use fire, disintegrate, ashes. Let's see what fire looks like. And well, we should probably make the game end as well. Otherwise, you'd be just stuck there with no player. We've destroyed the player. You're stuck with the end of the game. Let's go game. And let's scroll on down to game over, lose. And if we click plus, we can add a little effect. I don't think confetti is a good choice for losing the game. Let's go. I've never seen Blizzard before. Let's hope Blizzard's interesting. Let's test it out. So it should be that if I hit the enemy, there we are, I die. Just another go. All good. Let's stop that just in case it plays more annoying noise in our ears. So we got player death. Now we need to give the player something to fight back with. A projectile. You know, a weapon it can fire. Now, projectiles in arcade, in MakeCode Arcade, are kind of awkward, but in a way, I kind of find them interesting. Now, you may know that every time we need to create a sprite, we need to go to sprites and we need to set new sprite. Now, the trouble is imagine your player is firing lots of bullets. Imagine having to create a new sprite for every time you create a bullet. That's kind of annoying. And you can't name them sensibly either. You'd be calling them sprite 1, as you'd be calling them bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, bullet 4, bullet 5, bullet 6, bullet 7, and so on and so on and so on. And that makes your game very slow, makes it very messy, and it can actually cause the console to run out of RAM. So we're going to do something different. We're not going to create a new sprite every time we create a bullet. We're going to basically create a list, and that list will store every single bullet that we create. And every time we create a bullet, we just add to that list. And every time we get rid of a bullet, we take away from that list. So, we're going to need a list. Fairly obvious. If we click on Advanced, we have this option for arrays. I'm going to click arrays. And we've got the first option here, set list to, and an array of some numbers. I'm going to put that inside on start, because this gets declared when the game first switches on. And I'm not going to call it list because that's boring. Let's rename the variable. Let's not call it list anymore. Let's call this list of bullets, because that's what it is. It's a list of every bullet that we create. And 0 isn't a bullet, 1 isn't a bullet, so what are they doing here? They're useless to us. I'm going to get rid of them. Just going to grab that whole thing out of set list of bullets 2 and just get rid of it. And instead, we haven't fired any bullets yet, so let's make it empty. Let's make an empty array. So in arrays, in create, we have the option for an empty array. List of bullets is just empty for the moment. Okay. So, how do we actually create the bullets then? Well, we'll need user input. We'll need a button that they can press. Let's say the A button. So if I go to controller and on A button pressed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a value onto the list of bullets. If I go to arrays and scroll down, we have this option in the section called modify, called list add value blank to end. Now notice I want the one that says add value, not add value at. We just want add value. So it's the second one down in the modify section. And we are not adding to list, we are adding to list of bullets. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a projectile object into this list. And we have to do that in a kind of cheeky way that Arcade doesn't really like, but oh well, I'm the programmer, Arcade's the software, I'm in control here. Let's go to sprites. And where is it? So in the projectile section, we've got the set projectile from my sprite with a certain velocity. And that's exactly the one we need, but we don't need this red gubbins here. We just need this nice blue oval. So I'm going to grab the whole thing, because I have no option, plonk it in there, and I'm going to steal the blue oval out of that, and I'm going to put it in the list of bullets part. And then I'm going to delete the projectile, the bit that's remaining over. So we're going to, when the A button's pressed, we're going to add a new projectile to the list of bullets. let's fix this up a little. Projectile, well, it's going to come, it needs to be fired out of something. Let's make it fired out of the player rocket. What direction do you want it to go? Well, I'm thinking, do you want it to fire or do you want it to sort of lay a mine? I'm thinking a mine might be better. Yeah, let's have it so it's almost like it's laying mines. So let's change this to 0, 0. So it creates a projectile with no velocity. And finally, we need to give the projectile a image. So I'm going to click on that. Trouble is with bullets, they're kind of small. We don't want to make this too big. So I'm going to go down into the bottom left-hand corner where I've got the option to change the canvas size. Let's change that to 6 pixels by 6 pixels. And it's now tiny. And I can design my bullet. So let's make it greyish. My only complaint with MakeCode Arcade is it doesn't have very good selection of colours. Let's just have, yeah, why not? Teal in the centre, white. You can design it however you want. That will show it quite nicely against the black background. We're going to create a bullet and it's going to come from the player rocket. Let's see that in action. Let's see if it works. So I can move my character around, remember? Let's press the A button. And it leaves a little bullet behind. They don't do anything. The bullets don't kill the enemy yet. In fact, all I'm doing is making a mess. It looks like the duck is making some duck droppings. Anyway, let's make these bullets a little bit more interesting. So, we've seen that we've added gravity for the enemy rocket. Let's now add gravity to the bullets. And this is where things get interesting. This is the reason why I started adding bullets as a list and not as individual sprites. Because we're going to apply the gravity effect to everything in the list. And that's not going to really work with how we've got things set up already. We've got on-game update and we're just changing the enemy rocket here. We need to change the bullets as well. And whilst doing that, I also need to use the least amount of code as I can. Because otherwise you're writing code constantly and it gets kind of boring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function that adds gravity to any object I tell it to. So let's go over to functions and let's make a function. And let's call this compute gravity. Now this function needs to know what sprite it should be computing the gravity for. So I'm going to add a parameter, and the parameter I'm going to add is a sprite type parameter. And I'm not going to call it my sprite, but I'm going to call it thing to add gravity to. That's a little bit long. That's getting kind of awkward. I'm just going to call it a floating thing. I don't know. Thing? I don't know. I'm not being very imaginative today. Just call it a thing. Call it whatever you like. I don't know. Gary Bob, Susan, anything you like. What this function is going to do is it's going to take the floating thing that we're handing it, and it's going to basically do all this stuff that we did on game update, but it's not going to be just for the enemy rocket. It's going to be for whatever thing whatever the floating thing is. So to do that, I'm going to go into on-game update, and I'm going to steal, and I'm actually going to properly move these away, both if statements for enemy rocket. So I'm stealing them, leaving on-game update completely empty and alone. And I'm going to steal them and put them inside my compute gravity function. So now compute gravity will do the exact same thing that on-game update was, but only once. And now we need to change things a little bit further. What we need to do is, like when we were changing the X's and the Y's, we need to change every mention of enemy rocket and change that instead to be the floating thing. And to do that, I'm going to go to the top of my function, I'm going to grab the floating thing, and I'm going to replace enemy rocket. Replace it again, replace it again, replace it again. Oh, missed it once. There we are. Replace it again, replace it again, replace it again, and replace it again. Now, if you want to double check to make sure that you've done that right, you should have had to do that 8 times, because there were 8 mentions of enemy rocket. So we've now replaced them all with floating thing. And if I move that away, oh dear, we can see that it's left a mess behind. So enemy rocket, enemy rocket, enemy rocket, enemy rocket. Let's just delete all those. Okay, so we've now replaced on-game update with a function called compute gravity. And we're telling it what to compute it for. And I'm not going to do it now because it takes ages for the simulator to load up. If we were to press play on the game, we'll realise that the enemy rocket now does nothing. It's kind of useless. So we need to add the functionality back in. So we've just written a function that can take any sprite and it could make it be affected by gravity. We're going to do that now for the enemy rocket. So we're going to go to functions, and we're going to call compute gravity, and we're going to call compute gravity. This is going in on game update, because this needs to happen multiple times per second. We're going to call compute gravity on enemy rocket. And that error will disappear, thank you. It took a while. But basically what we've done is, it looks like we've done a whole lot of messing and fiddling around, but all we've done is, well, we've not actually changed anything. But the enemy rocket is still orbiting, and nothing new has happened. So why did we do it? Well, we've made it now easier to add gravity to any object that we desire. All I have to do is change this variable here to, I could change it to the player rocket, and that will be now affected by gravity. I could change it to the black hole, and the black hole will be affected by its own gravity. That's not going to work. I could change it to pretty much anything. But I need to change it for every single projectile in the list of bullets. So how am I going to do that? well, I'm going to need a loop. So let's go to loops, and let's go to scrolling down for every element inside a list. For element value of list. And what this will do is it'll go through a list, and whatever's inside here, it'll do to every item in the list. What do we want to do to every item in the list of bullets? We want to apply gravity to them. So let's go to functions. Let's call compute gravity. I need to change this for element. So for element of list, well, list doesn't exist, but list of bullets does. And I don't want to call compute gravity on my sprite. I want to call compute gravity on every value inside the list of bullets. So I want this value here. I want to steal it. And I'm going to put it in place of my sprite. And in those 2 lines of code, we've very simply and very neatly added gravity for every bullet in the game. So I can move around, and when I drop a... trying to avoid the... When I drop a bullet, it now orbits the black hole. They don't do anything, but doesn't that... I died. I was just about to say, doesn't that look pretty? So we've now got it so that the bullets are affected by gravity. So that is the kind of staple parts, but now we need to make it so that the bullets are actually useful. They actually do something. So I should have it so that if a projectile hits the enemy gets destroyed. And the projectile gets destroyed. So how do I do that? Well, if I go to sprites, we can find another overlap block. On sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind player. I'm going to change that now. So instead of sprite of kind player, it's going to be sprite of kind projectile. Overlaps other sprite of kind enemy. So what should happen here? Well, we need to destroy the sprite. And we could just destroy it, but that leaves us with a little bit of a problem. When we destroy sprites, it only destroys their image. It doesn't destroy sort of the memory of the sprite. It doesn't destroy the little bit in RAM that it is carved out for itself, that it's taking up. We need to destroy the actual storage of the sprite. And we're deleting bullets here. Where are the bullets stored? Well, they're stored in the list of bullets. So we need to remove, if a projectile hits the enemy, we need to remove that projectile from the list of bullets. So if I go to arrays and scroll down, near the bottom, I've got the option to remove value at and a number. So I'm going to grab that. And this isn't going to be the list. This is going to be the list of bullets. And I don't want to remove the value at 0. 0 is the first bullet in the list. Now, this could happen for any bullet. So it could be the first bullet, the last bullet, the second bullet. We don't want to sort of only delete the first or the last. We want to delete the actual bullet that hits the enemy. So we need to find that inside the list. If we go to arrays, there is an option to get the value of an item. Sorry, we'd get the index of a item in the list. And basically what that's saying is look through the list and find the number that represents this bullet. So down at the very bottom in operations, there is a find index of, and we're going to use that. And we want it to be in the list of bullets, so change list to list of bullets. And we want to find the index, we want to find the position in the list of the sprite that does the overlapping. So this sprite up here. I'm going to grab that and stick it in that blank bit. And it took a long time to get around to explaining it, and it's all, the blah blah blah, but basically what we've done is we've removed the right sprite from the list. And now it's removed from the list, it's not going to take up any RAM, and now we can delete its image as well. So if we go to sprites and scroll to effects, we can destroy. We don't want to destroy my sprite, we want to destroy this sprite here. And if I click the plus, we can do it with an effect. So someone in chat asked for a fire effect. Let's destroy the sprite with fire. Let's now, well, we need to destroy the enemy, so let's go to sprites. Let's go down to destroy. And we don't want to destroy my sprite this time, we want to destroy the other sprite. The sprite that is the other part of this collision. And if we click the plus, we can destroy that with fire as well. Okay, let's give it a little play. So I've got my duck. When I drop the bomb, it starts to orbit, and if it hits the enemy, which I hope it's going to do soon. No? Oh, that was close. Hit the enemy. There we are. It destroys the enemy and one of the projectiles, which is grand. That's just exactly what we want. Trouble is, what's to stop me winning automatically by going, no enemy is going to make it through that. So I need to make sure that the projectiles have a lifespan. They don't last forever and ever and ever. So let's click stop. And we're just going to add this in. So we're going to have it so that when a bullet is created, it's going to sort of set a self-destruct timer for itself. Let's go to sprites. Let's scroll down. And we have this option for life cycle. We have the on-created sprite of kind player. And we don't want that to be player because we're talking about projectiles. When the projectile is created, it should set a lifespan for itself. And if we go to sprites, luckily we don't have to mess around with clocks or timers or time-based mathematics. There is a lifespan already built into the game engine, and we can find it in physics, I believe. Is it physics? No, it's not physics. I've lost it. I've gone absolutely mad. Set sprite lifespan, set sprite lifespan. Oh yeah, sorry, it is in physics, bizarrely, but in physics we've got the set my sprite x to 0. And we don't want that to be my sprite, we want it to be the sprite that is created. So let's drag that one in there. And we don't want to set its X position, we want to click the drop down arrow here and scroll down to lifespan. And now we need to set the lifespan to a number of milliseconds. So if you wanted 5 seconds, you want 5,000 milliseconds. If you want 3 seconds, you want 3000 milliseconds. Let's do, yeah, 5 seconds. And what happens, well, when the sprite is destroyed? Well, we've already written that for enemy. So maybe we should have that when the lifespan goes as well. So if we go to sprites and scroll, we can find on destroyed sprite. And instead of sprite player, we can have it on sprite projectile. And I'll admit, I haven't tested this, I just thought about it just now. But what happens if we were to just steal these 2 blocks out of the overlap? Because when this one destroys here, that should trigger this one. Actually, not those 2 blocks, just the top. Yeah. So in overlaps, where we've got the remove value from list of bullets, I'm going to put that in on destroyed. And find the index of sprite. It shouldn't be too much of a problem if that doesn't work. It won't be noticed, but if it does work, that should be a nice, neat way of tying things all together. Let's test things out. Okay, there we are. We could see some of the sprites disappeared after 5 seconds. It was a bit long, but yeah, they do disappear nicely. And we did destroy an enemy. And if I play again, there we are. We can use it as a... There we are. Destroys it. So that's it for the base game. If you wanted to improve on things, there are a couple of things we can add. We could have it so that, of course, that when the enemy is destroyed, it plays a nice little sound. You know, sound effects really make a game. And I can't remember who said it, but when it comes to game design, 50% of it is the game, and the other 50% of it is the sound you use. And, you know, that includes music, sound effects. It really makes you feel there. It really adds some sort of weight to your actions. What else could we add? We could have it so that there are multiple enemies, and the enemies turn up every now and then. The way I would do that is quite familiar in terms of the list of bullets thing that we've used. What we'd have is a list of enemies, and we would just have it if we use a game on-game update every 500 milliseconds, or every 2 seconds, or every 5 seconds. We could create a new enemy, and rather than creating a new variable, a new sprite every time I wanted to add an enemy, I could add it to a list of enemies, the exact same way that we've done it with the list of bullets. We could have a list of bullets, list of enemies, and that way you're not dealing with enemy rocket 1, enemy rocket 2, enemy rocket 3, enemy rocket 4, and so on. Anyway, I hope that has been useful. And I hope that's a nice little insight into some orbital gravity mechanics. Now, I didn't use real ones, because real ones, they require a little bit of Pythagoras. They're quite interesting when it comes to maths, and if you're into this kind of stuff, it's a great thing to look into further, and something that's really useful for things like Unity, if you're into making games on Unity. But nevertheless, I hope you've enjoyed, and well, have a wonderful evening. Farewell.